All right, we're back with another update and forecast on the Gifford fire. Definitely looks like it's a bit more active in the northwestern portion of this fire than when we were doing this update yesterday. And maybe that's the first thing I should say is I do these updates every day. So today is August 10th. If you're watching this at a future date, maybe check my channel to see if I've done a more recent video than the one you're currently watching. With that being said though, we'll just start off with this view. This is a view of the northwestern side of the fire. Pretty tall smoke plume right now, and you do see that that smoke is traveling, so it tells us that the afternoon winds have started to pick up. How we're going to do this video though is look at past, present, and future. So we have a new fire progression map today. It just came out this morning, and it's going to show us how this fire has grown throughout time, give us a good idea of where it's been the most active recently, and then we'll look at the current. Where is it currently active? Where, for example, where on the map was that smoke plume? Then we'll look at the forecast to see if things will likely get worse or better in the future. Before we get into that though, here is just the overall location. You got Los Angeles down here, and then if we zoom in here, I've been saying about 14 miles northeast of Santa Maria, but the most active part of the fire is this northwestern portion, so it might actually be better just to say it's about 18 miles east of San Luis Obispo at this point. And then you also have Pozo up there. We're actually going to zero in on some of those exact communities and even some streets around this northwestern side of the fire. So that's where it is. And then we can look at what happened specifically yesterday, just an update on what's been changing on this fire. Acreage is up to 117,000 acres. And then here's that new fire progression map that I was just referencing. Dark blue is going to be where this fire started around August 1st, and then teal is as you get into around August 4th. That light greenish color is August 5th. It's a good thing I'm not colorblind. And then where the most recent growth has been is that bright red. So we had that slop over on the northeastern side. Sounds like they've made great progress on that. Whenever you hear like one of those operational updates and they say, oh, we're mopping up that slop over on the northeastern side, mop up means that the tall flames are basically done, and now they're just going into where the ground might be smoldering, throwing some dirt on it, and just kind of making sure it doesn't flare back up again. So whenever you hear mop up, that's good news. This northwestern side of the fire, though, is still fairly active. Now, this is why I do like to show this fire progression map, though, is it gives you different levels of concern depending on where you live. For example, if you're down in Cuyama, down to the southeast of this fire, the teal color right there shows that there actually hasn't been much growth on that entire southeastern finger in maybe 6 days. But then if you're closer towards the northwestern side of the fire, that's where there is still some current concern, and it is still the top concern for the fire personnel in this area, because we did still have some activity yesterday, and as we saw on this imagery, we are still seeing some activity right now. So that's the fire progression. Then we can look at containment. It's around 32%, which is actually pretty good considering how hot and dry it's been. When it comes to where that containment is, the red line is the uncontained fire perimeter. The black line is going to be where it is contained. So on this southwestern side, close to 166, that was actually an area very close to a large amount of structures, as well as the southern finger. That's where we have the most black around this fire. And even though we are still seeing red on the southern edge in the wilderness, we actually haven't seen much growth there recently. And then the other spot is the eastern side, which bumps into the Madre fire burn scar, which we had in 2025, or earlier this summer. And I just got to say, yesterday in the video, I had noticed the Madre fire burn scar for the first time on this map, just because it was a very light shade of gray, and there's kind of a lot going on in this map. And today, the Madre fire burn scar is a much darker color of black. So if there's any chance that whoever makes this map had seen my video and changed it, thank you, because now we can see the burn scar quite well. So the reason that's important, and it actually is going to come up later in the video, is the reason they're able to contain it on this eastern side is the fire bumped into the Madre fire burn scar, where that dark black shading is, and the fuels have already been burnt out there. So if there's no fuel, as in grass or brush or some kind of chaparral, maybe oak trees, then the fire has nothing to burn, so it's going to stop or at least be easier to stop. So that's part of the reason this northwestern side is as active as it is where the eastern part of the fire burned earlier this summer. Some spots on this northwestern side haven't burned in more than 30 years, and if something hasn't burned in more than 30 years, it's like it has never even burned. There's fuels that have just been accumulating and are ready to burn. So there's our fire containment. You see none on that northwestern side. And then last thing I should mention on this map is there are still evacuation orders and warnings in place. So always stay updated with local resources when it comes to that kind of information. Now let's get to the current. What's going on right now? We already watched that video of what it looks like from the ground. This is what it looks like from space. That's the fire, and you can see how it starts to pick up as we get into the last half hour to an hour. So in yesterday's video, it had actually started to calm down as we're getting later into the afternoon, which was a little surprising. Today, it's picking up in intensity, which isn't surprising because as you get to around 4 p.m. in the afternoon, that's usually the hottest part of the day. So then that's going to be the driest part of the day that pulls even more moisture out of your fuels. And then it's easier for the fire to not only spread, but if any burning embers get picked up by the wind and get dropped, it's easier for it to start spot fires as well. And that's been one of the main features on this fire is just how dry the fuels are, which promotes the growth that we've had. There, wind hasn't been the biggest factor, and that's where there's a lot of nuance in fires. Sometimes wind is the main driver, but in this case, it seems to be mostly the steep topography. Fire likes to go uphill, and then also just how dry everything is. And then particularly on the northwestern corner, the fact that there hasn't been a fire in a long time. So that's why things like prescribed burning are very important. Then you clear out some of those fuels at a better time in the year instead of waiting until it's 100 degrees out with 9% relative humidity. Last thing I'll point out on this map is that the smoke seems to be going almost straight north, which seems to say that we have a southerly wind today. So that's a little different than the more southwesterly wind that we have had the last couple of days. And while I'm thinking about it, we can just turn winds on this map. The models seem to maybe get this wrong a little bit. The models are still showing southwesterly wind, whereas that satellite imagery, the smoke seems to be going straight north. The other thing that could be happening is perhaps the model is for surface wind, but then the smoke is actually rising fairly high in the atmosphere, and then maybe your winds up at the higher altitude are more southerly. So that can happen where you kind of have winds going different directions depending on the altitude that you're talking about. But the reason wind's important is that often tells you what direction the fire is going to go. So we'll keep that in mind as we're looking at the fire activity right now. So there's our fire perimeter. Before we start looking at the current heat detections, I think what would be helpful is actually look at some of these structures in here, especially on this northwestern side. I'm sort of going to ignore the rest of the fire at this point because, I mean, looking at the fire progression map, there hasn't been much growth in any other parts of the fire. We have some containment there, and even that slop over seems to be in the mop-up stage. So we're just going to zero in on this northwestern side, particularly these structures over here to the west of the fire. And the reason I want to zero in on this is somebody in the comments yesterday said that there's High Mountain Road that has dozens of structures on it, and it's pretty close to this northwestern side. So what we can do is actually turn on a different view so we can see the exact street, see High Mountain Road right there, and then kind of keep your eye on that. We've got our fire over here on the eastern side of the screen, or right side of the screen, and then we can turn it back to global imagery just because the contrast is a little bit better. And you can see that those structures right there are the structures along High Mountain Road. So then the next thing we could do is grab our ruler, take it to where we have some of those closer ones, go to the fire. That's about 4 miles away. And then we also have some structures up here on the north. To actually put a name to those, we can go back into our street view. It looks like that is Avenales Ranch Road. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. They said it in the operational update. I should remember how to say it. And then here we have West Pozo and East Pozo. And if I go back to this imagery, it's those orange dots right there represent the structures in that direction. So if we go ruler to Avanalis, that's about 2.3 miles away. So that might be the top concern, is that cluster of structures right there. Although it's not as much of a cluster, that seems to be a bit more spaced out, I would say. And then from Pozo to the fire looks to be about 5 miles. So that kind of tells us where some of the highest areas of concern are. Now what we can do is look at the fire activity. So modus and Veers, this is going to make you feel great if you live anywhere other than the northwestern side, because I mean, you look at the west here, southwest, south, southeast, east, you're not seeing really any of those red stars, and in a lot of places you're not even seeing the yellow or orange stars, which represent where there's been heat even more than 24 hours ago. So yeah, Kuyama, you're looking good at this point. All the structures down on the southwestern side, not only has there not been heat, but it's also mostly contained to that area. Shows that things are looking much better on that slop over as well. Just a little heat still detected there. That's why they're in the mop-up stage. But once again, northwestern side of this fire, you see a lot of those red stars, which represents where the growth was within the last 24 hours. Then what we can do, and I'll kind of do my usual disclaimer, this is going to overestimate how much the fire is moving right now because of a number of reasons, partially because it picks up heat that's in the smoke and thinks that it's the fire. But this does tell us that the fire is pretty active in this northwestern portion right now. Zooming out, maybe a little heat. You see that yellow box down on the south, but yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about that, mostly because it's within the fire perimeter, so there's not going to be much fuel for that to escape or cause anything new. Northwestern side, that's clearly where we're concerned about. And if we actually zoom in there, I'm interested to see what kind of topography we're dealing with. Where you see that red shading, that's going to be where more of the growth has been recently. And here's why we're most likely seeing a lot of this growth. So you get these southwesterly winds. It picks up a burning ember from the orange, which is the previous fire perimeter, maybe drops it in this little canyon right here, and then it's able to rush up this other side of the slope, not only because it's aligned with the winds, but because fire likes to go uphill, and then it's also filled with incredibly dry fuels. So not a big surprise that we're seeing a lot of activity on that side. What is good news, though, is that in order, it looks like, for it to go up towards Pozo, we're going to have the opposite happening, where it's actually going to have to start going downhill. And fires don't like to go downhill because heat rises. So when a fire is going uphill, it's preheating the fuels above it, whereas the opposite happens when it's going down. So guaranteed this fire went up this slope a lot faster than it went down this slope. So while it's been taking off the last couple of days, hopefully as it gets over this ridge line, we'll see it moving more slowly as we continue. And then also just notice that they are currently flying some aircraft on this fire. They got some fixed wing aircraft. They got helicopters dropping water. There's one of them right there. It's a pretty cool map that we have to use. So steep terrain, but terrain actually might start working in our favor as the fire goes downhill. Vegetation, I'd say, is the number one thing working against us just because of how dry things are. And then connected to that, the weather is also working against us because it's incredibly hot and dry out there. And it actually looks like it might be getting a little hotter and drier tomorrow. So for today, this model was showing temperatures in the mid-90s, afternoon winds around 20 miles per hour. Tomorrow, showing mid-90s, which means some parts of the fire will be triple digits with relative humidity in the single digits. And it is showing slightly windier conditions tomorrow afternoon with a more westerly component. So if the wind is more westerly, that actually might be good for really all of these structures, whether you're on High Mountain Road in Pozo or Avanalis Ranch Road. The last thing Avenalis or Pozo would be a straight southerly wind. That's why I'm kind of curious about that satellite imagery right there. The last thing High Mountain Road would want would be an easterly wind. But when we look at the weather forecast for tomorrow, it looks like it's mostly from the west. So that would actually try to push the fire back into more of what I believe is this wilderness area. And then with that being said, Monday is going to be the hottest, driest day that we've seen in a while. So I'm definitely planning on doing a video tomorrow, as it might be one of the more active days that we have had recently. And that's pretty much summarized in the forecast for tomorrow. Hot and dry conditions will continue into early this week, although no significant wind events are expected. So although the winds might come up tomorrow afternoon, it's not a wind event, so that's good. Wind event kind of means that a wind advisory or red flag warning would be issued. And hot and dry conditions will continue to produce very elevated fire weather conditions. Temperatures look to cool down after Tuesday. So whoever writes this is similar to me, that they like to end with some silver lining. That seems to be partially silver lining. Things will start to cool down after Tuesday. And then I also always like to point to the fact that we have around 4,000 personnel on this fire who are just doing some amazing work in some very tricky conditions. So big thanks to them. 23 helicopters, 290 engines, 145 dozers. And then yesterday, somebody also asked about the structures destroyed. That is up to 2, with 3 civilian injuries and 7 firefighter injuries. So once again, that points to big thanks to everybody who is actually out on this fire doing the hard work to keep our lives and property safe. So hopefully this video was helpful. I'll have another one coming out tomorrow, and thanks for watching.